Hello, I'm Wendy. Today I'm painting a bluebell wood in a very fast and loose manner using some simple techniques. This is a partially narrated video done in real time, and excluding drying time, the painting was done in about 30 to 40 minutes. It's painted on Saunders Waterford watercolour paper, £140, not surface, and this time I stretched the paper before I used it. As you can see, I've done a pencil sketch on watercolour paper of a woodland scene. The scene is taken from one or two of my photographic references, so there's no particular photograph that I'm working from. What I'm hoping to do is to get a sense of distance in the finished painting. I'm going to do that by having some soft wet into wet backgrounds, some distant trees. Then we're going to have some trees in the middle ground, which are going to be stronger. And finally, we're going to have this log in the foreground. So we're going to have foreground, middle ground, and distance. And that's what does help to give a sense of depth into a painting. What I'm doing here is putting on a wash of a sort of very pale limey green made from lemon yellow with a bit of Prussian blue, and this is going to stand for some distant foliage in the picture. And then in between where I put these greens, I'm putting a very, very dilute mixture of Prussian blue. I don't want the colours to run in together too much. I'm working on stretch paper this time. I really do like working on stretch paper. It does give a very different feel to the surface, and it is excellent to prevent cockling, especially when you're working quite wet. As you can see, I have been introducing a little bit of a stronger green just to ring the changes in the colours there in the distance. And now with a slightly smaller brush, I'm putting in some of the distant trees and bushes, wet into wet, with a stronger green. I will have introduced some burnt sienna and raw sienna to the mix that I used previously, and I continue to use these mixes of greens throughout the painting. When the background was dry, I just felt I needed to reinstate some of the yellow. It had dried back just a little bit too much, I felt. Now here I'm using a very dilute mix of ultramarine with a touch of red, or it could be cadmium red, could be crimson, it doesn't really matter, just to knock back the ultramarine just a little bit. So I'm putting this colour very, very dilutely into areas where I want the bluebells to be. I'm keeping some of the edges quite soft by just touching them with a drop of water. And now I'm doing the same sort of thing with a very light green for the areas where it's going to be mainly grass. I find this a very good way of working, because then when you come to build up the paint in the next stages, you know exactly where to build that paint up, and you're not going to lose those areas that you wanted. Also, I like to work around a picture, and I like to cover up the white. So in this case now I'm getting rid of a lot of the white, and I just find it that it is easier to judge other colours and tones against areas that you painted rather than white paper. And I'm starting to build up the bluebell areas with some stronger paint. Some of it is going wet into wet, and some of it is going on wet into dry. I'm making very random marks, and I'm not trying to actually paint bluebells at all. The brush marks are going to stand for the bluebells in the finished painting. And now I'm working in a similar way for the grassy areas. I'm just introducing a little bit of warmth in the foreground area using burnt sienna. And what I'm doing now is strengthening some of the areas of the bluebells in the foreground mainly, to help with getting this sense of depth in the finished painting. I'm now putting a first coat of a very dilute burnt umber on the log. The next stage is to lift out the colour from the trees so that we can put the tree colour on there, which is going to be a very light brown on one side and a darker brown on the shadow side. I could have masked out the tree trunks, but I don't know, I'm not a big fan of masking fluid, and this being a fast and loose sketchy sort of painting, I just didn't think it was the best thing to do. So this is quite a nice way of getting back to the white of the paper. You need to use a clean brush, get most of the water out of it, and then lift off the paint with the side of the brush. I find a flat brush very useful for doing this sort of work, a stiff flat brush. So every so often, wash your brush, dry it off, and then go back and do another part of the tree trunk. Do be aware that some colours are quite staining on the paper, but in this case it doesn't matter too much because the trees are going to be quite a lot darker than the background, so I'm not going to worry about it. I think these trees are looking light enough to do what I want to do on them. And you can use a tissue to mop up some of the extra water and some of the colour. I'm now using a rigger, I think it's probably a number 3, to paint some of the very distant tree trunks, using a mixture of burnt umber and ultramarine. And now I'm working on the tree trunks in the middle distance, using a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine, the light coming from the left, so it's going to be darker on the right hand side of the tree trunks, and I'm using a combination of techniques really, some wet onto dry and some wet into wet. And here I'm working on strengthening the right hand side of some of the distant trees. With a stronger mix of the burnt sienna and the ultramarine, I'm again strengthening the right hand side of the tree and also making a start on putting some of the little twigs or very small branches and little twigs that come out at the base of some of these tree trunks. Oh, you probably noticed that I had a mount around the picture. When a painting gets to a particular stage, I do like to put a mount around it. It gives you a much better idea of what you need to do. I think it's starting to take shape now. It was looking, and still is looking, extremely messy. But that's what woods are like. They're not all neat with everything in a particular place. They are quite messy. And I think this is going to work out all right. I'm quite happy with this. I do start out a painting with a plan, but I'm not too bothered about the individual marks that I make. I like to make fairly random marks, loose random marks at the beginning of a painting, see what I've sort of made, see what I've come up with, and then from there on then develop the painting. Marks are going in now to stand for the little twigs and leaves and everything on the bottom of a woodland floor that's very untidy and very messy. I'm trying to keep the marks stronger in the foreground than in the distance, and also warmer to add to our feeling of depth in the painting. To paint the tree trunk, I'm using a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine again, and I'm using a combination of wet into wet and also some dry brush technique, and I am placing some quite dark darks into this log to bring it forward in the picture. there's just a few more additional marks that are going in quite randomly. Just a few leaves going in with a dark green. Otherwise I think the trees can look quite dead, and there would be a few leaves on the tree at this time of year, and it adds a bit of life to the painting as well. I'm using a mixture of ultramarine with a little light red here, and putting the shadows along the woodland floor that are being cast by these trees in the middle ground. Some foreground detail here using the rigger in the dark green, some ivy on the tree trunks, and some little twigs sticking up around the woodland floor again. Continuing with a little bit of foreground detail here, and I've mixed white gouache with a tiny bit of ultramarine just to put a few light spots here and there, just to brighten up the picture and to soften some of the linear edges of the log in the foreground as well. So here's the finished picture. I did a little bit more on it. I just added 2 or 3 trees in the far distance, and maybe just strengthened 1 or 2 of the twigs, but that was all. I hope you found this video useful and like the finished painting, Bluebell Woods, in a fast and loose manner. If you did like it, then give me a thumbs up and do subscribe to my channel so you don't miss anything in the future. Bye for now.